Nick in Massachusetts. Hey, Nick, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Where in Massachusetts are you, Nick?
Close to the Boston area. I'm not going to give you my exact address.
That's okay. No problem. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I'm a recent convert to your show, and I find you have a very interesting way of telling us how and why things are the way they are in America. So I'm wondering, do you have an answer for why are so many American cities so bad with crime and poverty and terrible schools and all that? And European cities are, by and large, much nicer places.
Right. Yeah, having lived in Europe for a year, I think I have some insight into that. I'd say that the principal cause, there are two principal causes, actually several principal causes, but the number one principal cause is that we fund our schools and many of our public services, our police departments, our fire departments, other services that are essential to quality of life. And much of our infrastructure, maintaining our roads, our bridges, and things like that, we fund it with property taxes. And so a poor community is going to have poor schools. A rich community is going to have rich schools. A poor community is going to have poor, police departments and fire departments, or they're going to incentivize their police departments to stop people and issue tickets to them so that they can use the community as a source of revenue, particularly the poorer people in the community who, and particularly people of color. So that, is one thing that we do here that in Europe, you find that basically every government is far more federal. They're more of a federal system than we have here, where the federal government is making sure that the standards of schools are the same everywhere in the country, that hospitals are the same everywhere in the country, that the roads are maintained all across the country. The countries are much smaller, so that, whereas we delegate these things to the states, and then the states, dump them on the local districts. So you got that as number one. Number two.
Also, European countries don't feel the need to burn so much of their money on the military, and we do.
That's absolutely true, but that's with your federal budget. You're asking about the cities, and the cities, some of them get federal money, but it's really more these local issues. Number two is you've got a 500-year legacy of racism in the United States. First in the form of slavery. Well, actually, first in the form of the genocide of Native Americans, then in the form of slavery, and then in the form of actual Jim Crow and apartheid. We were in apartheid. And so, that created a real problem for the emergence of a black middle class. Much of that was addressed, clearly not even all of it or even probably half of it, but much of it was addressed with the Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson. But those programs were rolled back by both Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. So you've got that. And then the third thing is that many of our cities were actually, in my lifetime, back in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, many of our cities were thriving. I mean, downtown Baltimore was a manufacturing center, mostly textiles. Downtown Detroit was a manufacturing center, mostly automobiles. And people of all races were working in those areas and making a decent living. Those jobs, by and large, have been shipped overseas. And so our trade policies, I'd say, is the third thing that has gutted our cities. Does it make sense, Nick?
Yeah, that does make sense. What would you say to a lot of people like to say our cities suck because they're all run by Democrats, and I don't find that argument all that convincing, but what would be your response to it?
The Democratic Party has historically been the party of the working people and of the downtrodden, basically, the people who are trying to get a bootstrap to lift themselves up by. The Republican Party has traditionally been the party of the wealthy, the upper middle class and the very wealthy. So what you find is that the wealthy suburbs, the places where you find the McMansions, that's where you find the Republicans. Whereas places that are poorer, places that have more people of color, people that have more places that have more working people, places that have more people who are desperately seeking opportunity, they're going to be voting Democratic. And so what they have is the arrow of causation wrong. The cities are devastated. Working people and poor people are desperate for an opportunity to get a leg up. And, they're looking for a hand up, not a hand out necessarily. And so they turn to the Democratic Party. It's not that the Democratic Party created the disaster. It's policies, some of which have been endorsed by the Democratic Party in the past, some of these neoliberal policies, but mostly driven by the Republicans. that, you know.
Well, as you point out, it was Bill Clinton that put through NAFTA, not Reagan.
It was Bill Clinton who signed NAFTA, but the important point is that NAFTA was passed over the opposition. The majority of Democrats in the House opposed NAFTA at the time, and the majority of Democrats in the Senate opposed NAFTA at the time. The majority of Republicans in both the House and the Senate supported NAFTA at the time. NAFTA was a Republican deal. And yes, Bill Clinton signed it and believed in it, apparently, at the time. And just like Barack Obama, President Obama apparently believes in TPP. I think that they're wrong. I think that they're you know.
We can only wonder why.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm not going to try to look into their souls or come up with motives. I just think that they're wrong, and I'll say that. But the fact of the matter is that with the single exception of permanent normal trade relations with China, every single trade deal, whether it was the Korean trade deal, the Colombian trade deal, the Peruvian trade deal, the NAFTA, I mean, you name it, right? There's been about a dozen of them so far. Every single one passed Congress with a majority Republican support in both the House and the Senate, and majority Democratic opposition in both the House and the Senate. And I'm guessing that the same thing will happen this fall after the elections when John Boehner and Mitch McConnell try to roll out TPP. So it's Republican policies that have decimated our cities, and it's the people reach out to Democrats for help. And the problem is that you elect a Democrat as a mayor of your city, for example, Detroit, where I used to live and worked, and where my oldest child was born, and where I was for 2 years a pastor of a church in Detroit back in the 70s. Detroit was destroyed by these policies, you know, by these Republican policies, you know, free trade policies. And then, you know, so Detroiters reach out to Democrats and say, you know, please help us. You get a Democratic mayor and a Democratic city council, and then what happens is, you know, because the state will not help, the city doesn't have any tax base anymore because the industry's all left, so the city can't really bail itself out. It has no way to generate the kind of revenue that it needs. The state refuses to support it because it's under entirely Republican control. The federal government has, you know, they bailed out New York City back in the 80s, but they haven't bailed out another major city since then. And so the federal government is no help. And so then Rick Snyder, the governor of Michigan, Rick Snyder comes in and says, you know, we're going to do away with democracy in Detroit. We're going to pass a law at the state level, which was overturned, by the way, by citizens' referendum, and then put back into place in a way that couldn't be overturned, with an explicit clause saying citizens can't vote on this. Once again by the Republican legislature. We're going to pass a law that allows the governor to put a lawyer, a, quote, emergency manager, in charge of the city, and he will run it like a dictator. And they tried to sell off the Detroit Art Museum. They got stopped on that, but they sold off Belle Isle to a bunch of billionaire investors. They're trying to privatize the Detroit water system. That's the whole Flint thing, was about setting up the Flint and Detroit water systems for privatization, and so that they could sell it off to some billionaire oligarchs. I mean, you know, so people are screwed. And that's the situation. Nick, I got to move along, but thanks for watching us on YouTube. Thanks for the very thoughtful call. It's great to hear from you.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.